Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Supporting Midlife Development webinar. It's fantastic to see so many people already tuned in and chatting away in the chat screen to the right. Please do carry on sharing experiences and resources and talking to each other in general. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping just before we get started. You will notice just sort of down below and to the centre of the screen, there's a ask a question button. So if you have a burning question, please do click on there and submit your question, and both Jane and I will take a look at those and answer as many as we can. There shouldn't be any technical issues, but if there are, we've got people working behind the scenes, and what will happen, they will give you some advice in the chat box just to the side. But do let us know if you are experiencing any difficulties, and we'll try to advise you as best we can. I will apologise ahead just in case there are. I know there's high demands at the moment on people's Wi-Fi. So fingers crossed, everything works okay for today. I'm going to ask my co-presenter, Jane Watts, to introduce herself, and then we'll get started. Jane, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Jane Watts. I've been working in the area of education for all my life pretty much, and particularly in more recent years focusing on ageing and learning. I'm an associate nowadays of the Learning and Work Institute, and I've been working with the TUC on these types of projects around midlife work for some long while now. Jane, have I not?
You have indeed.
Yeah. So we've been, well, firstly working on the midlife career reviews, which was a way of looking at whole lives and how you can bring everything from your vast experience across your life to bear into your midlife and as you prepare for going into your older age. But also more recently, the Midlife Skills Review project as well, where we looked at different tools to help people in midlife review their skills, think about learning new ones and so on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for all of you that don't know me, I'm Jane Warwick, and I'm one of the projects officers in Union Learn. I work in the service team, and I have a particular remit for midlife and older workers. Shortly, people that are working behind the scenes, they're going to put up my email address throughout today's session. So if you do have any questions that aren't addressed today, please fire them off to me, and I will deal with them as best I can, or we can have a chat. Oh, there you go. Look, somebody's already put it up.
Well, okay. It's behind the scenes.
No, they're very, very fast.
Yeah.
So, Jane, I'm just going to start off with a question, if you don't mind. What was the purpose? Can you tell people what the purpose of developing the Midlife Skills Review was and is?
Well, we just thought that following on from our project on midlife career reviews, that it was really important to help people think through their skills reviews. And we'd had this incredibly popular tool, which I'm sure Jane will mention again later, about helping people to do a midlife skills review. But there were a whole load of things that were in the context of our lives, which were changing and which we really needed to address if we were going to help people in midlife more. And I think the thing that drove it initially were two things, partly driven by government, but also by people's actual experiences. The state pension age and other pension changes really influenced people, because there was an issue about whether people would continue in work for long, and early retirement became norm. But it became very clear that once people were starting to retire somewhat later, then actually we had to think about what it was like to stay in work longer. and how we were going to prepare for that, and how people might, if you got to the age of 50, sometimes people used to think, oh, well, perhaps I'll just put up with this job that I don't really like very much. Or perhaps you'd think, oh, well, I'll just kind of try and eke out until I can manage to retire. But once now, if you're 50, it's going to be nearly 20 years before you can get your state pension. And occupational pensions are not necessarily great, and not everybody has them still. And there was a lot of pressure as well on the labour market. Now, things recently have changed, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But there was, what we really wanted to be able to do was to help people make positive choices at their midlife stage. And therefore, to help them do that was a way of trying to introduce the notion of review your skills, think about your future, take positive control of your future if you can. And to help you do that, the project particularly focused on helping us to help each other, so that we would get peer reviewers in the workplace to help each other plan and review our skills. And that would be the start point of some changes that people might choose to make, either doing better in their current jobs, getting more training, getting promotions, perhaps moving to another job, not writing themselves off at the age of 50, but actually thinking, what can I do that's actually going to suit me, suit my lifestyle, suit the life I would like to have as I grow older, and also make sure that I'm well prepared as much as we possibly can as individuals. Obviously, there's structural stuff going on around us, but as much as we can as individuals, prepare us for the rest of our working lives and for our lives beyond that, and to move positively and, if possible, sustainably into that future. So that was where the drive came from to start the project.
Yeah. No, and I remember when we first worked together, it made real good sense for the trade union movement to become involved in projects, because supporting people through lifelong learning is core trade union business. To help people open up opportunities for them in their workplaces, to help people to become more resilient to labour market forces, and to stay in work longer. So it made, real trade union sense for Union Learn to become involved and to engage with the unions. And we had, some fantastic successes with the Midlife Career Review. And one of the things that we found out, Jane, you'll probably recall, is that when we started to hold midlife career reviews, we quickly found out that it went much broader than people looking at their career. There's skills that they had obtained as a rep, maybe, or sort of activities outside of the workplace all came into play, and that kind of led on to some of the transferable skills that I'll touch on in a little while. But for the unions, they could be there to really support people with the midlife career review itself. I don't know, do you want to say a little bit about the career review itself, Jane?
Yeah, I will just briefly. I mean, it was intended to be a whole life review. The point of it from an education perspective was that we, the Learning and Work Institute, formerly known as NIAS, had always felt that there should be an entitlement in midlife, particularly around the age of 50, but also at any key life transition, really, to have a review and to also just take stock, but also to be able to get access through that, both to learning, but also into other advice or support that you might need around every aspect of your life. So when we use the word career, it wasn't just about jobs, it was about your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the union learning reps was sort of, for the trade union movement, the ideal path to go down, because they already had this experience of working with learners, supporting learners. And I think the midlife career reviews, which now midlife development reviews, give a really good platform to open up that discussion for people to really review their current situation, you know, their job that they're in, and whether they're looking for a promotion or whether they're looking for another job internally or externally, considering all those sort of external factors as well. Because and I'm sure you found the same, Jane, when you speaking to people when they delivered midlife development reviews. They were saying that people immediately focused on the here and now and the jobs that they were doing, and it's through, you know, sort of the skills of reps and other advisors that it was really teased out of people about previous experiences and maybe sort of voluntary roles or roles they have in the community and their trade union roles that really enriched and built on their sort of transferable skills.
Absolutely, and that was very much the approach that we were taking, is to look at, and that's why I mean, it's, you've got to look across the life and look through the life as well. So at each life age, and also at all your different experiences, no matter where you gained them, and bring those to bear. And I noticed one of the questions that we've been asked, which I might as well try and tackle right now, is, you know, how to get an interview when you're in midlife and older. Well, you know, part of it is absolutely making the most of every single bit of your experience. And if you do a review, either with a peer or with a careers advisor or whoever else you can, a training development person is often another person you can do that with, that would enable you to go back through all the experiences that you've had and what you've got, that's a benefit in, you know, and a way of helping to tackle some of the age discrimination that you might face in some circumstances. Is to actually draw on your whole experience, because you can give examples of different things you've done in different parts of your life, which will address the needs of any job that you're applying for.
Yeah, and I think what was particularly good for Union Learn and the trade union movement was that pivotal role of the union learning rep, because during their training they have interview skills. I know most people dread the role play activities that take part in training, but
Yeah.
certainly for the union learning reps, they're sort of trained to provide that reflective space, you know, to make sure that it's a place of confidence where people can talk freely. And I think this is, you know, one of the reasons that it was so successful for the trade union movement. You know, people had that platform, you know, both, well, with the other partners as well. But people were able to explore issues which helped build their confidence. It kind of increased motivation with the cohort of people that have been supported through a midlife development review, help them identify learning needs, which for us really ties in with our whole ULF projects, and you know, the support, that the ongoing support, and certainly for Union Learn we introduced sort of a 3-stage model, which was the kind of getting started, where you get that kind of employer buy-in and the learner buy-in. It also helps us to sort of like encourage workplace activities, which are things that reps up and down the country are doing. So it was great for them. And then we had that sort of intermediate, the middle stage of sort of like the one-to-ones, the midlife career reviews or the midlife development reviews themselves, and all those value my skills activities. And then there's that follow-up. So I think, you know, a really good review to have, because you've got that follow-up part to help, you know, people go along. And I know that you worked with a lot of different partners and they worked in different ways, but certainly for us, you know, you could see that the whole sort of midlife development review was really growing momentum, and I think it reflects society as well, doesn't it, with the aging demographic.
Very much so. Probably should mention the government's initiative called Midlife MOT as well at this point. It's available on the DWP website, and it just encourages you to look at 4 different aspects, and which are the obvious one that we've been talking about now, skills and jobs, but also to look at health and well-being and your financial health and well-being, which is the bit that some people are a little bit scared of looking at, but it's the bit, funnily enough, that the government's most keen that we should look at, because they know that people don't save enough into their pension pots, and it's a way of just taking a bit of action earlier on. So while that's it's not great, but one thing that's really important there is that employers can develop programs, and examples on the MOT site show, particularly in the financial services sector, how some employers have developed programs for staff. And obviously, if you're looking to do that in your own workplaces, that is a model that people can have a look at. You don't necessarily want to cover all of those. It's not appropriate for all workplaces, but it is something that if an employer is serious about trying to hang on to, and it is a really important thing to try and do, hang on to their midlife workers, then providing something that helps each midlife worker come to their own conclusions. And employers in the past were a bit reluctant to do this kind of training because they thought that everybody would be up and off and finding a new employer. In fact, research that was done by a colleague of mine a few years back actually showed that if you offer as an employer this kind of supportive training, opportunities for one-to-ones, opportunities for reviews, some workshops, and access to improved finances and health, actually people are more likely to stay. And there are three challenges about an aging workforce, one of which, or the first of which is, to try and retain people. That's definitely the best way for employers to maintain and hang on to their aging workforce. And at the time, people were really worried because there were not going to be sufficient people in the labour market unless older workers stayed in work. And so that was a driving force behind this. Now, things might have changed as we go forward, but we'll come to that later.
Well, I was just thinking as well, with the midlife development review, a sort of integral part of it is, putting an action plan together. And part of that really gets drawn out from the discussions that people have. For me, a lot of people wanted to talk about keeping their job, which I'm going to come on to in a moment, Jane, and or possibly changing their career. They maybe wanted to talk about flexible working arrangements or how to sort of start that discussion. Or for some people, it was about learning something new. What sort of experiences and things were people sort of asking you, or what really stood out for you about what people were asking in the reviews?
So, there were some really noticeable ones on the personal level, which I think were what I suppose were most alarming at first, which was that we found it really successful to run workshops, and indeed I still run workshops with AGK staff around the midlife period, and I have run others with other employers. They would often say, "Oh, I've never discussed retirement with my partner," or "I've never discussed what we're going to do in our future with my family." And those personal ones were very moving, actually, and quite concerning. But then I think the other thing that stands out, I mean, there were loads and loads of things that came up, and the workshops were fascinating. Things that stood out were people who've not realised their potential, really. I would say that I'm an educator, but it gets you up in the morning. But it's, there are so many things that people have enormous skills and talents that they've developed in other parts of their life. They perhaps haven't utilised them. They perhaps haven't realised dreams that they had. And yet there isn't a reason for some of those things. Often, there are perfectly good reasons why people haven't been able to do the things that they want to do. And some of the systemic challenges or difficulties that people face will get in the way. But there are also lots of things that people could do if they took that little step to perhaps get a little bit of extra training, to perhaps enhance something or fill a little gap that they've got in their skills, and that if they built that confidence and did that training, then they would be able to go on and perhaps get a promotion, or perhaps do something slightly different, or take a sideways step, or just be a bit bolder, really, just have that courage. But that does require then some confidence building, and I think you get that partly through doing something where you interact with someone, you get that peer review, or you get a workshop experience, something like that.
No, I think you're quite right. I mean, finances came up a lot during the pilots and sort of subsequently with the groups that I've been working with, and that kind of a lot of people hadn't looked at what they would get in terms of if a workplace pension, or they hadn't looked at their finances. So I think, in terms of preparing to retire, it did open up a whole lot of different questions around pensions and finance, and subsequently a lot of the unions set up workshops for people in their workplace to review their pensions and their finances to help make a sort of a smooth transition. And also another thing that came up was, people started to think, what skills am I going to need going forward into retirement, if that's, what they were aiming to do, whether they were looking to volunteer or to upskill in terms of maybe using digital technology, because as we know, most things now, even to get a car MOT, everything seems to be done online. If you want to book an appointment at the doctor's, it's moving online. A lot of local services with councils, it's all moved online. So, there's a big sort of push towards digital learning. And also, I don't know if you found the same thing, but caring responsibilities came up time and time again because of the cohort of sort of being midlife, and the sort of the responsibilities, caring responsibilities maybe that people had, maybe for an aging parent or for children, older children. Was that yes, or both? Yes, absolutely. And I think also another thing that came up was people's concerns about health. Am I going to be healthy to stay in work longer? And also, do I have the skills? And that's kind of where we sort of move towards transferable skills and putting a load of resources together. Do you want to add anything to that, Jane?
No, I think that's pretty much covers it, actually. It's, that the health thing did come up a lot, the concerns, and certainly the anxieties about caring responsibilities, and worrying that those would take an increasing amount of time. So therefore then rights to flexible working do become important at that time. But then you've got to do that with a good financial understanding of the financial impact of changing your working patterns.
Absolutely. We will move towards looking at some questions very soon. I just wanted to say, Jane, earlier on you mentioned about sort of like the current situation, and I was just wondering, for you, has anything changed in the light of COVID, which affects the workforce in midlife and the need for skills reviews?
Well, yes, I mean, in a way, it's probably made them even more necessary, because obviously it's still a little early to say exactly the impact, but it's absolutely clear that there's going to be a huge, as well as the health impact of COVID, which has clearly been disastrous, and particularly for some people, unbelievably serious. The impact on the economy is already starting to show, and there's a number of I noticed that somebody just put up earlier in the Learning and Work report, there's another one from them launched today, which we'll talk about what's happening when furlough has to stop, and the next steps to avert long-term unemployment is its subtitle. That's being launched at lunchtime, I think, today. So you haven't got a link for that one yet because it's not published yet. Later. The Resolution Foundation have been doing a series of reports on the likely financial impact, and particularly which sectors are affected and which age groups are affected. In the resolution reports, the newspapers and other media coverage tends to highlight that they've been talking about young people, and obviously young people are going to be hugely impacted by the uncertainty in the job market, largely because their jobs are more insecure anyway, lower paid. But the impact on lower paid people is the biggest, and that includes, and the reports, when you dive into them, look a bit more at this, is young people, but yes, and also women, especially older women, and older people in general, and then where the inequalities intersect, those will be the areas of greatest worry. Now, we can already see that large numbers of redundancies have been announced in the finance sector, not in the finance sector, in the aviation industry, in everything but the finance sector pretty much at the moment, but there will be reductions everywhere. But retail is taking the biggest hit. Hospitality will follow once furlough ends, and redundancies, yesterday I think 12,000 redundancies were announced. That's an enormous number at what wouldn't have we wouldn't have been at that economic point had it not been for this. Another forecast has shown that another impact that at the moment isn't quite being probably looked at, but the Centre for Ageing Better have done a report today, and that's about the impact on people retiring, that the impact of COVID will be that retirees will be economically more worse off than they are at the moment. So there's the kinds of effects. I mean, obviously there are global challenges to this, and it's a global impact. And several people have suggested we should therefore be looking for global solutions. And particularly, there's a recent piece of work from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, that is talking about how we've got to look for global solutions, partly because in developing countries the levels of poverty are likely to increase because of this, but also we trade globally. We do not trade in isolation. We do not have economies that work in isolation. So, that the impact will always be greatest from this on the poorest people, the lowest earners, and so on. And that's globally as well as nationally. So there's some huge things to look at there for people in midlife, therefore, hanging on to those jobs, managing to stay in work up until state pension age if that's what you need to do, or what you want to do, or even beyond it. Many people continue to work beyond it, whether from necessity or desire. Then obviously we have to be able to enable people to do their best in what is going to be a very, very challenging labour market.
Yes, I agree with you, Jane. I think, for everybody, not just midlife, looking and reviewing your skills and making yourself as sort of resilient to the labour market as possible is really key. And, a really good time for people to look at what skills they have and see if there are any skills that they want to update, but an ideal time to have a review with your union learning rep or another advisor if the person isn't in a union. Should we move on to have a look at some questions? I've seen that it's jumped to 15, Jane, so I hope you're ready. So I think, the first one there, how to get shortlisted for an interview when you're over 50. I know you touched on that earlier on, because I do recall you saying to think about all the skills that you have, not just your current job. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
I think getting some help actually is probably the other thing, and looking at all the information. One invests a huge amount of time in preparing for an interview or preparing an application, but I think it's really important to draw on your whole life, and I noticed there's a related question about not necessarily drawing on your union activity as a source of skills and experience. You can always refer to it as voluntary work, by the way. if you really feel that need to disguise it. I'd be proud of it personally, but I've been lucky to have the kind of employers that were okay.
There is actually on the Union Learn climbing frame, which I know Louisa and Yusuf are busy behind the scenes working. They'll put a link up shortly. There is an actual full crib sheet of skills you may have developed in your reps role. And whilst some people may be reluctant to highlight them on an application form for whatever reason, they are still developed skills. And, you know, sometimes they're things that people don't think about initially when they're filling out an application form. So there is a fantastic resource, a whole list, as I say, of skills people may have developed. I think the other thing as well is, you know, where people do have union learning reps and other reps in their workplace, they could talk to them, couldn't they, about sort of interview techniques. There's lots of employability skills resources, both on the Union Learn websites and lots of other websites out there.
Through, haven't you, to other resources? There's some quite good videos on YouTube about how to prepare well for interviews, and there was a really good lot that were particularly. I'll look for the link and let you have it so you can post it later. There was some very good ones about trying to show your skills when you've, and this is coming on to a question that's slightly lower down there, which is about promoting yourself and you've not had a job interview or assessed your skills for many years. And I think that's a really important question. Starting off with a review is a really good way to do that, to start thinking about it in an objective way, and then using some of those resources that Jane's just mentioned. But also you can, you know, there are ways of getting training, particularly online, and you have to find a relevant model, because all kinds of industries do different kinds of interviews, and you need to do something that's appropriate. And you mentioned, Jane, about the Career Service. Their online tools are quite useful if you're going for a job in a different sector, because you can look up what the generic things are they're looking for, as well as what they've specifically said in a job spec or in a job description.
Yeah, and I mean there's also
isn't it? Just make sure you answer the questions. It's like an exam when you're promoting yourself. You know, if they put something on the list that you need to tell them that you can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it really useful to actually talk through my application or my CV with somebody else. So, you know, if a union learning rep, or, you know, if a rep is willing to do that, and, you know, you've got the time, because talking through your application really gives you a good understanding of what you've put in there, but also because you're talking about it, you're emphasizing the skills that you're trying to highlight to a potential employer. There's also I just want to add, we have added some resources to the Union Learn websites. I'll give a plug for those in a moment when I cover some of the resources, because I would like to say, if you are looking to deliver midlife development reviews, you're not on your own. We've got a wealth of resources that we're going to touch upon shortly. I'm going to pop into another question here, Jane, and it's age discrimination. What's the best way to overcome discrimination? One way or another, an employer hiring can work out a job applicant's age. That's true. They can discriminate against the applicant based on age. It is almost impossible to prove that they have broken the law. What's the best way to overcome this? Well, I think it goes a little bit outside of the conversation today, but I will say, you know, discrimination, it does exist. It may be best to have a talk, whoever posed the question, to your union or maybe to your full-time officer. If it's something that's going on in your workplace now, even more important to speak to your union if it's a current workplace issue. There's a lot of help and resources. Certainly, on the Work Smart website, which colleagues will put a link up to, and also have a look at the TUC website. But also, we say that discrimination shouldn't happen, and it is supported by the Equality Act of 2010. But we know that these things do still go on. But I would say try to tackle it if you can, and if you've got that support around you from your union. Union reps are trained to help and advise, and so are the full-time officers. So if you're in any doubt or you need help and support, contact your union. Would you add anything to that, Jane, in sort of broader terms?
Well, and I suppose in broader terms, yes, we know it exists. Yes, it's hard to prove, but you generally know when it's happening, in the same way that we understand other discriminations as they happen to us. And watch out for that link between the intersectionality, the link between that and other forms of inequality and discrimination, so that you're maybe having to do that. But it would be like tackling any other thing, is to make sure that if there is evidence, you do collect it and record it and note it, and keep a record of it, especially, and then follow the steps that Jane said. I mean, obviously, if it's a matter that needs to be discussed within your union right now, this minute, then do so and don't hesitate. But at the same time, it is hard to prove. But watch out for things that come up from other bodies. The Age sector is also aware of this, and so Age UK regularly will produce reports on this kind of policy topic. It's difficult in that there's some inbuilt systemic age discriminations in this employment in the whole labour market stuff. There's a real feeling that young people are the ones who should have the work. But actually, I keep coming back to, this is not a zero sum. This is about everybody getting a fair go. It's not about trying to say, this is not about older people get work and therefore young people shouldn't or don't or something. And it shouldn't be about young people getting the work and older people not. This is about trying for us all to work as an equal society, and to try to redress some of those things, not make them worse. So tackling kind of that intergenerational discrimination stuff that comes up, it's very ugly stuff that comes up a lot in the media, that tries to kind of drive a wedge between younger and older people. Actually, it's best to form alliances across those gaps if they're there. I mean, I don't think they are. We all get on intergenerationally with our families.
Absolutely, the experiences of both, when you have the intergenerational working and learning, really cements sort of a positive way forward, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, workplaces that have intergenerational teams, for example, have found that they're very strong, very resilient as teams, because skills are shared and passions and enthusiasms are shared across the teams.
I'm going to take these next two questions together, really. I'm 64. Is it too late to be looking at midlife skills? No, definitely not. And we're going to come on to some resources and ways for you to go forward. It's never too late to learn. And also, we had a question about engaging with employers and getting the employer on board, and that is mentioned in a lot of the resources that we've put together, because since the first project that Jane and I worked on 7 years ago, Union Learn and TUC have been working on a number of resources. If you're stuck for getting started in your workplace, have a look for the Getting Active publication. A link will be put up, but it's on the Union Learn website, and if you look for the Supporting Midlife Development section, that's where you'll find it. It's loads of activities and ideas for really engaging with the workforce and starting to sow the seed about midlife and what considerations need to be made. We also have a midlife development review webinar, which is on the TUC education website. You can also find that on Crowdcast and YouTube, but you will find the links on the TU Ed website. Very soon, we're going to we're promoting the new Smart Choices, which is preparing for the third age publication. It's quite new for this year, and it replaces the Supporting Learners 50 plus. Oh, look at that. Did you hear that little reminder? That means we've got to move on because we're almost out of time. There's also a fantastic resource that shows you how to do a midlife development review. Lots of resources, templates, suggestions, if you don't have time, giving you quick top tips for what you can do to do small bite-sized chunks. And of course, there's the Value My Skills cards, which I just happen to have a pack close to hand there. I'm sure you've all seen them, but this is an integral part of the midlife development review that looks at transferable skills. A really, really good resource. So popular that we've put them now online. It's available as an online resource. And yesterday we filmed a video just showing myself and Matt Poynton, another one of the Union Learn team, just looking at the skills, a few of the skills cards, and that should be up next week on our YouTube, on the Union Learn YouTube channel. I will shout out, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. There's so many great videos on the Union Learn YouTube video. It also appears on the Union Learn website in our Getting Started section, which is under Learning at Home. And of course, there's the mini guide series, which talks about financial planning and pensions, health and well-being, mental health, help for carers. And last but not no means least, the climbing frame. We have a whole learning theme dedicated to supporting midlife development. And again, there's quizzes, there's timelines, there's activities, templates for people to use in their workplaces. So please don't feel that you're alone. There is so much support there for you. Jane, would you like to add anything to that? I know I garbled off a whole load of resources that are there to support people to get going.
Yes, I'm just having a quick look at the remaining questions to see if there's anything else we should talk about. Just to think about some resources outside of this, if you're trying to convince employers, especially ones who are reluctant about unions, look at, they may not be great on business in the community either, but they also have the Age Champion based within them, and also they have resources around employers and aging. Yeah. And the MOT that I mentioned that's been tried in the financial services sector, they have very much published about the results of their work. If you go to the government's, and it was posted earlier in the chat, I saw that there on the MOT page, there's some evidence from employers and about what they did, and that might be the kind of thing you can use to convince an employer. Nice comment from somebody called Kim. Good to see that. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. And just in terms of, there's loads of resources that Jane's just mentioned, but just thinking about the current situation and forthcoming redundancies. And I'll just respond briefly to Ian. Yes, I do think everybody should have an entitlement to skills reviews, not just at midlife, but at other key transition points as well.
They have an entitlement in France, don't they, Jane?
Yes, they do. I mean, unfortunately, it's become a bit watered down. But yes, there is an entitlement to skills review for everyone. In fact, now all workers. But I think what there isn't there yet is enough help to determine when's a good time for you to do it.
Absolutely.
The big thing is for it to be separated entirely from any performance reviewing,
yes.
Because it really shouldn't be part of that. This is about you and your skills, not about meeting the needs of your employer at that moment. This is about the longer term. And I did notice that somebody's asked about employers don't always want their staff to move on to bigger and better things. Well, they might not, but on the other hand, that doesn't. That's one of the things to overcome when you're talking to them. But actually, if by doing something like this kind of training, you can get a more committed and loyal member of staff, actually you'll find that employers are quite often quite keen to talk about things that are relatively low cost but might have quite a big impact.
And as I say, the trade unions are a pivotal role. It really puts the reps at the heart. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, we have to finish now. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. So I'm going to have to close, but to thank everyone so much for your comments, for your questions. And please, if there's something that's, if you've got a burning question still, please email me. My email is jwarwick@tuc.org.uk, and I signpost you to sources of information, or we can carry on the conversation. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.